The air inside the studio was thick, charged, almost electric. Oprah leaned back in her chair, the iconic calm that had carried her through decades of conversations flickering just for a split second into disbelief. The audience caught it too, the slight widening of her eyes, the faint gasp that slipped past lips that had silenced politicians, actors, and kings. But on this night, it wasn't Oprah who held the power. It was Jasmine Crockett. She had leaned forward, eyes locked, voice steady yet burning with conviction. With all due respect, Ms. Winfrey, people like me don't get the luxury of waiting for the perfect stage. We live every day in a fight just to be heard. The studio erupted in a murmur. Some gasped, others clapped instinctively, torn between reverence for Oprah's legacy and awe at Crockett's audacity. For decades, Oprah had set the tempo of American conversation, guiding, shaping, comforting. Yet in that instant, it felt like a torch was being wrestled from her hands. Oprah's face betrayed what her polished words could not. She had not expected defiance, not here, not on her stage. For the first time, the Queen of Daytime was not directing the scene. She was, part of it, caught in the tidal wave of a new voice too fierce to tame. Crockett did not flinch. She didn't soften her tone or temper her truth. She let the silence between sentences work like a blade, each pause sharper than the last. The crowd leaned in, the cameras captured every flicker of emotion, and millions watching at home would later replay this moment, over and over again. In a clash of composure and fire, something irreversible had cracked open. It wasn't simply an interview anymore. It was confrontation, revelation, a battle for the very meaning of who gets to speak for America. And in that instant, Oprah was left not with words of wisdom, but with stunned silence. But how did we get here? The story behind this clash is even more explosive. To understand the magnitude of what unfolded that night, you have to rewind the clock. For more than 3 decades, Oprah Winfrey has been more than a talk show host. She has been an institution, an empire of empathy, a cultural compass. The woman who could coax tears out of presidents and confessions out of celebrities who swore they'd never speak. To sit across from Oprah was to stand before the arbiter of America's living room. Her stage wasn't just a studio, it was sacred ground. When the cameras lit up, Oprah's very presence carried an aura of authority. Audiences trusted her too. Asked the questions that mattered while keeping the space safe, dignified, almost spiritual. In that chair, people revealed their secrets, and, in doing so, revealed themselves to the world. It was a power that few in history have wielded. For decades, Oprah's voice could elevate or dismantle, heal or expose. And until Jasmine Crockett walked onto her stage, no one had dared to disrupt that balance. Crockett, by contrast, was not born into the comfort of influence. Her rise came through raw grit, long hours in courtrooms, and fiery exchanges in congressional hearings where her sharp tongue cut through layers of political posturing. She wasn't interested in playing nice with the system. She was interested in breaking it open. Her reputation had been forged in viral clips moments where her blunt truths ricocheted across social media, galvanizing younger generations. We're tired of watching politicians talk in circles. So when these two worlds collided, one polished and measured, the other raw and unflinching, it was more than just a conversation. It was a clash of eras. A collision between the old guardians of respectability and a new wave demanding authenticity at any cost. For Oprah, the stakes were her cultural credibility. She had always prided herself on being in touch, on knowing the pulse of the people. But Crockett's presence threatened to expose the distance between establishment voices and the unvarnished frustrations of those fighting every day to be heard. For Crockett, the stakes were generational values. Could she prove, even on Oprah's stage, that her fire could not be tamed? That her voice would not bend to reverence for legacy? The audience felt it. You could sense the tug-of-war. The tension between admiration for Oprah's decades of influence and the undeniable electricity Crockett carried into the room.
Oh.
People weren't just watching two women speak, they were watching a symbolic battle over who defines truth in modern America. Because the truth was undeniable. The country had changed. Viewers no longer craved polished sound bites. They wanted raw conviction, unfiltered courage, a voice that mirrored their own anger and their own hope. Crockett embodied that shift. She wasn't just another guest.
Or I wonder why I
New America, unafraid to challenge even the most revered voices of the old guard. And so, when Crockett pushed back against Oprah with words that left the host visibly shaken, the shockwaves were amplified by what both women represented. It wasn't just about Oprah. It wasn't just about Crockett. It was about legacy colliding with momentum, polish colliding with authenticity, and the future colliding with the past. When the dust of that first exchange settled, it was clear this was no ordinary interview. This was the kind of cultural turning point people would talk about for years, and to understand why Oprah was so shaken, we need to examine the very different paths that brought these two women to this moment. Oprah Winfrey's story has always been told as the great American dream, a woman who rose from poverty, trauma, and obscurity to become one of the most powerful cultural figures on the planet. Her name alone evokes inspiration, wealth, and triumph. She is the billionaire media mogul who redefined television, who made literature fashionable again, who turned interviews into moral events. To millions, she is untouchable. Confidant, a mirror of possibility. But power, once accumulated, never remains neutral. For all her authenticity, Oprah gradually came to embody something larger than herself. She wasn't just a woman on television. She was the gatekeeper of what America would discuss and how it would be discussed. She decided which authors were worth reading, which politicians deserved a spotlight, which cultural issues would be elevated, and which would fade into silence. And with that power came contradictions too, glaring to ignore. Oprah was adored as the woman who gave voice to the voiceless. Yet critics argued she was also a master of containment. She could listen to pain without ever letting it spill too far, framing raw truth in a way that was palatable for mainstream America. She was willing to embrace hard conversations, but always within the soft glow of her own brand, carefully curated, carefully controlled. She brought out vulnerability, but rarely allowed it to spiral into defiance. She welcomed revolutionaries, but made sure their fire burned politely, never scorching the stage. And that is what made her clash with Jasmine Crockett so stark. Because Crockett was fire. She wasn't willing to have her passion softened or her truth filtered into something more marketable. She was a voice forged in courts and hearings, not in the choreography of daytime television. On Oprah's stage, Crockett's refusal to play the game exposed the quiet truth. Oprah was no longer the insurgent voice of a generation. She was the establishment. The irony was almost poetic. Oprah had once been the one challenging norms, demanding space for women, for black voices, for the marginalized. But decades at the top had transformed her from challenger to institution. For every barrier she had broken, she had also built a new structure around herself, a fortress of influence, wealth, and untouchable status. It made her admirable, yes, but it also made her fragile. To question Oprah was to question the very architecture of modern American culture. And so when Crockett pushed back, it wasn't just a challenge to a question or an interview format. It was a challenge to the symbol Oprah had become, a polished arbiter of truth. Yet one critic said, too often, reassured the comfortable while smoothing the edges of the uncomfortable. To Oprah's admirers, she was still the woman who opened doors. To her skeptics, she had become the keeper of those doors, deciding who got through and how loudly they could speak once inside. That tension between
Out.
Liberation and limitation was why the live moment felt seismic. Viewers weren't just seeing a strong guest spar with a strong host. They were watching an icon of narrative control meet someone who refused to be controlled. For decades, Oprah had held the upper hand in every interview, guiding conversations. With masterful ease, always able to recenter herself as the trusted voice in the room. But Crockett's bluntness left her momentarily exposed, her authority shaken in a way no celebrity confession ever had. The moment mattered because it revealed the gap between the world Oprah helped create and the world people like Crockett now demanded. Oprah's America was about stories that healed, inspired, and sold. Crockett's America was about stories that disrupted, challenged, and refused to be smoothed into something more comfortable. For Oprah, the stakes were more than personal. They were generational. Could she remain the unchallenged voice of credibility in a nation whose hunger had shifted from comfort to confrontation? Could the queen of television hold her throne in a time when unfiltered honesty trended faster than polished wisdom? For the first time, control was slipping through her hands, because across the aisle stood a woman forged in struggle, unapologetic and unafraid to speak truth where others stayed silent. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin under the spotlight. It begins in the grit of working-class struggle, in neighborhoods where resilience was not a choice, but a necessity. She grew up watching people she loved fight to keep food on the table, watching communities survive on grit when the system turned its back. From the start, her life was shaped by a truth that would define her politics: nothing is given. Everything must be fought for. That fight carried her into the law. Crockett's early career wasn't built on representing the rich or powerful. She took on clients who couldn't afford high-priced lawyers, people who had been written off or shoved aside. In courtroom after courtroom, she saw how justice bent. Is lead award wealth and influence while crushing those without either? And rather than adjusting herself to that system, she sharpened her resolve against it. Every trial, every late night, every client who whispered, "You're the first person to really listen to me," etched deeper into her the conviction that her voice had to carry further. It was in those courtrooms that Crockett's fire was first recognized. Her cross-examinations were relentless, her arguments precise, but laced with moral force. She wasn't afraid to call out contradictions, even if it meant angering judges or rattling prosecutors. She built a reputation not just as a capable lawyer, but as someone unwilling to bend. Colleagues called her fearless, opponents called her dangerous. To her community, she was necessary. The transition into politics wasn't polished. It didn't arrive in Washington wrapped in the soft glow of establishment approval. Oh, she came carrying the raw energy of a fighter, determined to use her congressional seat not as a throne but as a megaphone. From her first hearings, it was clear she was different. Where others couched their criticisms in layers of politeness, Crockett went straight for the truth. Viral clips showed her dismantling arguments with surgical precision, her words echoing like thunder across social media. And that mattered. Because for so many people, immigrants, working families, those who had spent their lives unseen, Crockett was saying what they had long screamed into the void. She was not afraid to make power uncomfortable. She was not afraid to name hypocrisy in plain language. She embodied a courage that resonated with those who had never seen themselves defended with such unapologetic passion. Crockett's rise wasn't fueled by donors with deep pockets or export backers whispering strategy in her ear. It was fueled by a base of people who felt for once that someone was not just representing them, but was them. Every fiery hearing, every moment she refused to yield, strengthened her reputation as a politician unbought and unbossed. To some in the halls of power, she was a disruptor. To those outside, she was proof that disruption was finally working. She didn't come to play politics. She came to fight for dignity. That distinction is what made her clash with Oprah so compelling. Oprah had mastered the art of making her guests feel safe enough to reveal themselves. Crockett had mastered the art of refusing to let comfort dilute truth. The difference wasn't just in style, it was in purpose. Oprah sought stories that inspired, Crockett sought battles that liberated. One was a mirror reflecting back America's best face. The other was a fire demanding America confront its worst, its why. When Crockett's name began trending, It wasn't just about the words she spoke. It was about the way she spoke them. Head high, voice unwavering, eyes steady, as though daring anyone to dismiss her. She wasn't simply commanding attention. She was commanding respect. For people long denied that respect, it was revolutionary to see. By the time she walked into Oprah's studio, Crockett wasn't just another guest. She was a symbol, a vessel for the frustrations and hopes of millions who felt their truths had been sidelined for far too long. She carried not just her personal story, but the collective story of those who had lived with struggle yet refused to surrender dignity, and that was the weight Oprah faced. Not just Jasmine Crockett, the Congresswoman, but Jasmine Crockett, the movement. When the cameras rolled and the conversation sharpened, it wasn't simply one woman against another. It was history against momentum, tradition against transformation. And when she stepped onto Oprah's stage, she carried more than her own story. She carried the voice of a generation. The cameras caught the moment perfectly. Oprah, leaning forward in her chair, voice smooth as silk, asked the kind of question that had disarmed countless guests before. Was polished, precise, wrapped in a velvet tone that invited reflection but carried an edge of challenge. "Congresswoman Crockett," she began, "don't you think that sometimes your passion comes across as anger? And that anger risks alienating the very people you want to persuade?" It was the kind of question Oprah had built a career on, gentle enough to sound fair, sharp enough to plant doubt. The studio fell silent. A few heads in the audience nodded, instinctively aligning with the authority of Oprah's voice. For decades, guests had softened under that tone, retreating into careful explanations or conceding to Oprah's framing. But Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, not in hostility, but in clarity. "With all due respect," she said, her words deliberate, "what you're calling anger is the reality of what it means to fight every single day for people who are ignored. If raising my voice for justice makes some uncomfortable, maybe the real problem is what they're refusing to hear." Gasps rippled through the audience. A few claps broke out, scattered at first, then quickly silenced by the tension pressing down on the room. Oprah blinked, recalibrating. For the first time, her carefully crafted rhythm was broken. She tried to redirect, offering a conciliatory smile. "But don't you think tone matters, especially in politics? That there's value in meeting people where they are?" Crockett didn't let the frame stand. "Tone matters," she replied firmly, "but truth matters more. Too many people have been meeting the system where it is, politely asking for change, only to be told to wait their turn. My community has been waiting for generations. Respectability hasn't saved us. Action has." The weight of her words shifted. The room, it was no longer a polite conversation. It was a confrontation of worldviews. Oprah, for all her mastery, was on unfamiliar ground. She was used to guiding the dialogue, but Crockett refused to be guided. Each sentence she spoke wasn't just an answer. It was a rebuke to the very premise of the question. The audience felt the shift too. They weren't just observers. They were witnesses to a power struggle unfolding live. Some leaned forward, caught between admiration for Oprah's persistence and awe at Crockett's defiance. Others clutched the arms of their seats, sensing history in the making. Every pause, every look, every word carried weight. It was like a chess match played in slow motion. Oprah advanced with careful moves, refined strategies, questions designed to corner her guest into concession. But Crockett played by different rules. She didn't retreat or circle the board. She flipped it entirely. Every polished line Oprah delivered was met with an unvarnished truth that cut deeper, rawer, and more resonant. For Oprah, the realization was dawning. This was not a conversation she could contain. Crockett was not here to be guided into reflection or softened into vulnerability. She was here to expose the gap between establishment comfort and lived struggle. And with each exchange, that gap grew more visible. The tension was no longer just between two women. It was between eras, between strategies of survival and strategies of disruption. The audience was no longer sure who to root for: Oprah, the cultural titan, or Crockett, the insurgent voice refusing to bend. The stakes had become clear. This wasn't just about passion versus polish. It was about truth versus control. And then, just as Oprah prepared to deliver her next carefully phrased question, Crockett cut through the moment with a counterattack so precise. Oprah had no words. The silence was heavy. Oprah's question hung in the air, elegant yet pointed, the kind of carefully phrased challenge that had unraveled titans before. For a moment, it seemed as though the script would play out the way it always had. The guest would shuffle, qualify their answer, and Oprah would glide gracefully into the role of cultural sage. But Jasmine Crockett didn't shuffle. She didn't. "Ben," she inhaled slowly, glanced across the audience, and let the pause linger until the silence itself became a statement. When she finally spoke, her words were steady, deliberate, each one cutting with the precision of a scalpel. "You asked me if tone matters," she began, "and I'll tell you what matters more than tone: truth. Because for too long, people have been told to say it nicer, wait a little longer, package their pain into something palatable. Out. And while they've been told to soften their words, their communities have been crushed under the weight of policies that never softened." The audience stirred. A low murmur rippled through the studio. Some nodded, some shifted uncomfortably, but no one looked away. Crockett leaned forward, locking her eyes on Oprah with a calm fierceness. "When a mother has to bury her child because the healthcare system failed her family, do you think she cares if my tone was gentle enough for the evening news? When a worker loses his job because corporations chased profits overseas, do you think he's hoping I smile more while I demand accountability? Tone matters for television. But for the people I fight for, survival matters more." The room exhaled in unison. Oprah blinked, lips parting as if to respond, but the timing wasn't hers anymore. Crockett pressed on, building momentum like a preacher in the pulpit. "Every time someone like me speaks up," she continued, "we're told we're too loud, too angry, too disruptive. But you know what? Silence has never saved us. Politeness has never saved us. If anger is what it takes to wake this country up, then maybe we should all be a little angrier." Applause erupted, tentative at first, then swelling until it rolled through the entire studio. The cameras caught faces in the audience, some stunned, some elated, some visibly wrestling with the truth of what they'd just heard. Oprah remained poised, but the control that once belonged solely to her had clearly shifted, and Crockett wasn't finished. She let the applause die down, then delivered the blow that left the stage reeling. "With all due respect, Ms. Winfrey, you built your empire teaching America how to listen. But somewhere along the way, too many of us were only taught to listen. To those who already had power, I'm not here to be polished into something comfortable. I'm here to make people uncomfortable enough to change." The words landed like a thunderclap. Oprah's jaw tightened ever so slightly, a flicker of surprise slipping past her composure. The cameras zoomed in, catching the rare image of the queen of interviews left momentarily without words. Crockett allowed the silence to return, letting the weight of her statements sink in. The crowd sat on the edge of their seats, aware they were witnessing something raw, unscripted, electric. And then came the sentence, the line that would replay across social media, on news broadcasts, in living rooms across the country. The line that would crystallize the entire clash. "If telling the truth makes me the villain in polite society, then I'll gladly wear that title because my people deserve more than polite lies." The eruption was immediate. The audience gasped, then cheered, some rising to their feet. Phones flashed as people captured the moment, knowing instinctively they had just seen history. The roar drowned out everything for several seconds. And when it subsided, all eyes returned to Oprah, but Oprah said nothing. For once, the master of dialogue, the orchestrator of revelation, sat silent. Not defeated, not humiliated, but undeniably stunned. The balance of power had shifted live on air, and there was no denying who had seized it. Crockett leaned back, her expression unflinching, her presence steady. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't reveling in the applause. She was simply rooted in her truth, a truth so undeniable that it had broken through the most carefully constructed stage in American television. Every second felt monumental. Viewers at home would later describe goosebumps, tears, a sense of something irreversible unfolding. For decades, Oprah had been the one to provoke those feelings. Tonight, it was Jasmine Crockett. The moment crystallized something larger than the two women on stage. It was about authenticity triumphing over polish, about unfiltered courage breaking through curated comfort. It was about a new generation declaring that they would no longer ask permission to be heard. And as the cameras panned over the audience, faces lit with shock, admiration, and awe, the sense was unmistakable. Something had shifted in the cultural fabric. Oprah had not been destroyed, but she had been disrupted. A new voice had risen, and it could not be ignored. The show moved on, but nothing felt the same. Crockett had delivered her mic drop, and with it, she had claimed not just the moment, but the momentum of a movement. But the clash didn't end on that stage. What happened next would take the fight far beyond the studio walls. The clash did not stay contained within the studio walls. By the time the credits rolled, the moment had already begun its second life online. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's mic drop answer flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok before the broadcast even finished. Airing, one clip where Crockett declared, "If telling the truth makes me the villain in polite society, then I'll gladly wear that title," was looped endlessly, racking up millions of views within hours. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett Clash and hashtag Oprah Stunned surged to the top of trending charts. The edits came quickly. TikTok creators spliced Crockett's words with reaction memes, applause tracks, and split-screen videos of historic moments. Malcolm X speaking truth to power, a Shirley Chisholm defying the establishment, even viral pop culture moments of rebellion. On YouTube, compilation videos titled "The Night Oprah Met Her Match" began climbing in views. It wasn't just an interview anymore. It was being framed as a cultural milestone. Newsrooms scrambled. Morning shows replayed the clip, with split panels of analysts dissecting every word. Was Crockett disrespectful? Or was she courageous? Was Oprah losing her edge, or was she simply caught off guard by a new political force? Pundits who normally dismissed viral moments as fluff admitted that this exchange carried unusual weight. "This isn't just about a TV interview," one commentator noted. "It's about the generational handoff of influence." Social media had no such hesitation. Supporters flooded Crockett's pages with messages of admiration, declaring her the voice they had been waiting for. Memes portrayed her as a superhero, cape billowing as she stood opposite Oprah's throne. Younger audiences, in particular, latched onto the moment as validation. Authenticity had triumphed over polish, fire over restraint. They weren't just entertained, they felt represented, but not everyone celebrated. Critics accused Crockett of being disrespectful to an icon who had paved the way for black women in media. Some claimed her tone was needlessly confrontational. She could have made her point without attacking Oprah. Yet even these critiques fueled the fire. Amplifying the conversation, the controversy became its own oxygen, keeping the story alive day after day. Soon, celebrities chimed in. Musicians, actors, and athletes posted their reactions, some applauding Crockett's courage, others defending Oprah's legacy. Politicians weighed in too, with progressive figures praising Crockett for speaking the raw truth and establishment voices urging for civility and dialogue. The clash had spilled from entertainment into politics, from politics into culture, until it became the story no one could ignore. The comparison to historic TV clashes grew louder. Commentators recalled the famous moments when cultural icons had been challenged live on air. Barbara Walters versus Fidel Castro, Dick Cavett versus Norman Mailer, even the legendary Frost-Nixon interviews. Crockett versus Oprah was being placed. In that lineage, framed as the night America watched the old guard face the new, the ripple effect was undeniable. College students debated the exchange in classrooms. Community organizers played the clip at meetings as a rallying cry for speaking truth without apology. Even in workplaces, break-room chatter circled back to the confrontation. For a brief window, it felt like everyone had an opinion, everyone was part of the conversation, and that was the real shockwave. The moment had transcended Oprah and Crockett as individuals. It had become a proxy battle for values, respectability versus authenticity, legacy versus disruption, polish versus passion. Every share, every like, every comment carried with it the implicit question, Which side are you on? The internet had chosen quickly. But offline, the deeper reckoning had only begun. Because beyond the memes, beyond the headlines, there was something bigger stirring. It wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a clash of eras. And yet, at the heart of it all, one question remained. What does this moment really mean for us? When the noise began to settle, and the endless cycle of clips, hashtags, and reaction panels started to lose their novelty, something else rose to the surface, something quieter yet more enduring. It was the meaning of what Jasmine Crockett had said. The clash may have been sparked by Oprah's question and magnified by the viral moment, but the essence of it went deeper. Crockett had reframed the conversation, turning it away from personalities and toward principles. At its core, the confrontation was not about who sat in the more powerful chair that night. It was about what those chairs represented. Oprah's aura carried decades of polish, legacy, and a kind of establishment control that had long defined the boundaries of acceptable truth. Crockett's voice, by contrast, pierced through. That aura to remind people that dignity does not need permission, that authenticity does not bow to tradition, and that the people's voice cannot be curated by the gatekeepers of culture. In one viral sentence, Crockett had articulated something audiences had been feeling for years. We are tired of watching our truths filtered through respectability, tired of waiting for approval to tell our own stories, tired of seeing power define what counts as valid. Her rebuttal was not just to Oprah, it was to an entire system of polish and control that had taught generations to edit themselves for the comfort of the powerful. That was why the moment landed so hard. It wasn't just about Crockett being fearless. It was about her giving language to a truth others had swallowed. It was about the daughter of working-class grit standing unapologetically on one of the world's most storied stages and saying, "Our dignity is not negotiable." For the immigrant who's been told to tone down their accent, it's the young activist dismissed as too loud. The community leader ignored until tragedy strikes. Crockett's defiance echoed as validation. It said, "You are not the problem for refusing to shrink. The problem is the system that asked you to." In that sense, Oprah's stunned silence was as symbolic as Crockett's words. It was the silence of a legacy meeting its limit, of establishment control, encountering a new force it could not easily package or dismiss. And yet it was not a defeat of Oprah as a person. Crockett's lesson went beyond her. The real clash was between eras, between narratives, between the idea that dignity is something bestowed versus the truth that dignity is something lived. This is why audiences clung to the moment, because in Crockett's rise, they saw a universal reminder. Authenticity will always outlast polish. Empires built on image will eventually falter before voices built on truth. And the measure of leadership is not how well you control the narrative, but how willing you are to tell it without fear. It was bigger than Oprah. It was bigger than Crockett. It was about USA, about a country deciding, once again, who we want to be. Do we cling to legacy out of habit, or do we embrace the raw voices that speak to the struggles of now? Do we protect the status quo for the comfort it offers? Or do we demand dignity that includes everyone, even those history has tried to silence? That was the gift of the clash. It turned a television interview into a mirror, forcing millions to look at themselves and decide where they stood. It proved that a single moment of truth, spoken with clarity, could ripple out and awaken something in the national conscience. And as Crockett walked off that stage, the lesson remained in the air. Dignity is greater than status, authenticity greater than polish, and the people's voice greater than any attempt to control it. But as the dust settled, one final reflection remained, a call not just to watch but to act. Oprah was left stunned, but America was left awakened. Began as a clash between two women on a stage, transformed into something larger, something uncontainable. It was not about celebrity or spectacle. It was about truth cutting through polish, about a new voice daring to stand tall in the shadow of legacy, about the moment a nation saw the power shift with its own eyes. For decades, audiences turned to Oprah for guidance, for permission to feel, for the framing of our cultural story, but on that night, it was Jasmine Crockett who framed the story. And she did it not for herself, but for everyone who has ever been told to sit down, to be quieter, to wait their turn. Her defiance was not arrogance, it was dignity. It was the insistence that America belongs to all of us, not just the powerful, not just the polished, not just those who've always had the microphone. That is why this moment matters, because it reminds us that legacies can be honored, but they cannot be worshipped at the expense of progress. It reminds us that truth is not fragile, it is unshakable when spoken with courage. And it reminds us that the future of this country will not be decided in closed rooms by gatekeepers, but in open spaces where every voice matters. So if this moment lit a fire in you, don't let it go out. Carry it forward. Share this story. Subscribe for more voices that refuse to be silenced. Add your voice to the movement for dignity, authenticity, and justice. Because this isn't just about Oprah, and it isn't just about Crockett. It's about us all of us choosing who we will be from here on out. Words, characters, reading time.